I was on a call at work today that was all about threat management and respect training. And we all know that the reason why this happened is because of the election coming up and the Trump assassination thing that happened. All of that noise and risk of escalation is prompting major corporations to think, well, maybe we should get people together, have a Zoom call, and talk about how to identify threats and how to encourage respect in the workplace at a time which may be contentious for some. Which is fine. I get it. It's good messaging to get out. It's the right thing to do. It's also not a surprise by any measure. But the call felt pretty disingenuous, as most corporate communications like that do. Because have you ever had somebody give you an ultimatum and then say, do you have any questions? Or what can we do to help? I saw a cartoon today, and it was this guy stranded on a desert island, and he's got a sign out on the beach spelled out with rocks that says help. And then this seaplane comes and he's waving at it, and the seaplane lands there, and this guy gets out of the seaplane and paddles over to the shore with a little inflatable life raft sort of thing with his camping gear and his chair. And then he sets up camp on the beach. And so you have the seaplane sitting out there. And you have this guy that's stranded on the beach. And you know the guy stranded on the beach wants to get rescued by the airplane that just landed. But no. What the guy in the airplane does is he gives him the little inflatable boat. So this guy is, I guess he's helped a little bit because a plane came and landed and gave him like an Ozark Trail little paddle boat. I mean, it's better than nothing, I guess, right? But then, like, the guy is thinking, like, man, I wanted to get rescued, right? And there's the seaplane, but the guy, the pilot of the seaplane, is so out of touch, he doesn't understand. Like, maybe he helped. He kind of helped the guy. But he didn't really do so in a genuine and meaningful way. Like, no matter how much he can say, well, I gave the guy some help, it really was pretty negligible. Like, the dude is still in trouble at the end of the day. He's still stuck in the middle of the ocean without the resources he needs to be successful. And it's like that in situations where maybe you have people in a corporate setting that get on a Zoom call or they call a meeting and they get everyone together and they talk about something. And it's supposed to be teaching, training, development. It's supposed to be something that's going to help people be better or be more prepared for something or have a better culture in the workplace. And the end result, though, is that people who know what's going on, they knew before and they know afterwards, and nothing you said is anything new to people. And then there's other people who it's going to fall on deaf ears or something, and so it's kind of pointless. It's pointless to have the conversation, because at the end of the day, the only reason it's being done is just so somebody can check a box and say, we had this conversation, we covered ourselves, we protected ourselves from some level of liability, and now we can move on with our day. Like, that's all it really is. And you can tell when something is ultimately disingenuous, when it feels like people are there saying, well, we're there to help, we're there to build you up, but they're also not really telling you anything you didn't know. They're not giving you any resources you didn't already have. They're just taking up a little bit of your time so that they can pat themselves on the back and say, well, nobody can say we didn't communicate, right? And that's something I think is very common in the corporate world. But more broadly, it's a sign of a society which cannot be honest. We talk about honesty, we talk about transparency, we talk about being authentic, but at the end of the day, we don't ever really want to put ourselves out there. It's like on this call, they're talking about bringing your whole self to work, as in basically if you have political views or you have personal views or whatever, you shouldn't feel like you have to hide who you are when you go to work. But then at the same time, they're also going to tell you that if you say anything that might be perceived as offensive, or if you encourage anything which could be seen as contentious, you could be reported, you could lose your job. So who is going to actually want to be transparent about their views on something sensitive like politics or something, when they're under threat of potentially being investigated, reported, and in trouble? It's kind of a thing where, as long as you have that aggressive attitude of if you see something, say something, and you're encouraging people to rat on each other, you're not going to have people bringing their whole self to work. Now, I'm not saying that it's okay for people to be disrespectful or abusive to each other. Absolutely not. But the issue is one size doesn't fit all. It's kind of like if you're always nice to everybody and you're supportive of everything, well, you can't stand for everything, because standing for everything basically means you stand for nothing. You got to pick something and then take a position, and some people will like that and some people won't. But you also can't have a one-size-fits-all approach where we automatically assume that anytime someone's offended, that's an ethical problem or it's a security risk. It takes judgment and courage and fortitude to throw the rule book out and say, I'm going to be honest in the sense that I'm going to tell you what I think. I'm not going to hold back on that. Whether you like it or whether you don't like it, I'm not going to pretend I agree with you while I'm talking to you and then do something against you behind your back. I'm not going to be supportive of you on the surface while I'm negative toward you behind your back. I'm going to just tell you the truth, how I see it. That straight shooting and directness, I think that's important. And we live in a society which increasingly hides behind screens, and we don't want to have confrontation, we don't want to offend anybody, we don't want to get in trouble, we don't want any kind of liability or risk. And so what do? We water everything down until there's not really anything that we really want to talk about, nothing we really want to address. Everything's surface level, and it's all just, how's the weather today? Well, you can only talk about the weather for so long before you kind of get tired of it and you want to talk about something that's a little bit more meaningful, something that feels meaty and feels substantive. And that's, I think that gets harder and harder, especially in formal environments, social environments. But discretion is understanding that, like, for example, let's say you were out around the water cooler and people are just talking and, BSing, and somebody is talking about somebody and they say, oh, I'm going to kill Bob because of what he did. Well, that could be banter. That could be a joke. That could just be somebody speaking metaphorically. They're not a threat. They're not saying they're going to go commit murder. That's not in their nature. That's not what they're about. They just are saying that figuratively, I'm going to strangle that guy because he got on my nerves, or he's being obnoxious, or something like that. Like, that's not a threat. But then the exact same phrase in a different context from a different person, somebody might actually be in a bad place mentally. They might be in a position where they want to do harm to somebody. And if you are in a position of leadership, especially, or if you're just a bystander, good judgment is to look at a person and know the signs, know the body language, know the context, and then understand that in some situations, something can be maybe not exactly the right thing to say, but it's not a big deal. And then in other situations, it's something where you have to say, well, that's a red flag, and I need to do something to make sure that I'm keeping myself and others safe and not allowing an environment to persist which is harmful or dangerous. But in the corporate world, in the eyes of HR and things, there's not really any discretion. There's not any good judgment. It's all just kind of black and white. What does the rule book say? We're going to investigate everything fairly, equally, consistently, and we're not going to make any exceptions to the rule. It's just going to be very black and white. And that's how you get these situations where people are frustrated because they can't have a real conversation with somebody, because a real honest conversation is basically not in line with that perceived impartiality. Let's imagine that you had two different people that skip work all the time. One person skips work because they have a life-threatening health emergency that just happened, or a personal tragedy. They're going through something extraordinary. And then you have another person who is just unreliable, and you know that one person is pretty much justified in missing work, and the other person is probably just not interested in fulfilling their duties. It's just that simple. But then from an HR perspective, you're still going to probably treat both of them the same, right? Because you can't show favoritism. That's fine. It's good to be neutral to a point. You shouldn't play favorites all the time to where people feel like your integrity can't be trusted. But it's also important to understand that not every single situation is the same. And if you can't look at things through a proportionate, honest, direct lens, then it all starts to feel fake and disingenuous, because what you're really doing is just using a lot of buzzwords. Things that sound right, things that are procedurally correct, but ultimately meaningless. It's like a game where you load in and there's an infinite open world that's procedurally generated. And you could go out and explore across the landscape endlessly, and you'll never run out of map to explore. But you don't have to go very far at all before you start to realize that despite being procedurally generated, it's all basically the same. It's like that with No Man's Sky. It's an amazing space game where every planet is procedurally generated. The scenery is cool. You can travel from one planet to another. It seems like it would be the perfect, amazing, epic game. And yet the truth of the matter is, it's described by many as being a universe wide and a puddle deep. Because, yes, you can explore infinitely, but it's just an infinity of the same basic variations on a theme repeating themselves. There's nothing to give it a sense of soul or spirit or meaning or context. And then compare that to a game where the entire map is designed by real people who put effort and thought into the culture and the art style of all the different things in the map that you're going to encounter. Well, that's a lot more meaningful because it has that personal touch of discretion and judgment. As a matter of fact, there's a quote that I heard that said discretion is the better part of valor. And what that meant was that bravery is important, but often wisdom is more important. Because wisdom is that ability to look at two things which are technically basically the same and understand that because of context, you're going to still treat them differently. Because you have to judge people not for their words, but for the content of their heart. And that's something that you can't really solidify or enforce with a rule book. You have to just have good intentions, want to do the right thing, trust your judgment, and follow your heart. And I think that pays off in the end. I really do. Sometimes it feels wrong to just trust your judgment, especially when your judgment may mean that you bend the rules a little bit. But I think one of the best trademarks of mature leaders is often people who will follow the spirit of the law but not the letter. And that's hard because, you know, I've seen inexperienced leaders in the workplace, and they will say things like, well, how exactly do I do this? How do I know exactly what to do? And the answer winds up being nuanced. You can't tell that person, well, here's how you do your job. I can't tell you how to do it. I can tell you what the correct answer is within the parameters of policy, absolutely. But I can't tell you how to be a good leader. I can't tell you how to have good judgment. That's something you have to figure out yourself. And it's a mixture of following the rules to a point and also understanding that sometimes the rules have to be treated as a guide, not as an absolute law. There has to be some level of grace to temper the law. But you can't tell somebody how to bend the rules while still respecting them. There's no rule book that'll tell you that. Follow the policy, except for when you feel like you shouldn't. Well, that doesn't sound right. That's not something you can exactly say. And yet it's true. You know, I started off as a assistant manager, I'll always remember this, at a Walmart store in Washington State. And there's another guy who was an assistant manager with me, and he started off at the same time. We both were in the same training class, and so we were in this store starting off as assistant managers. And I remember that there was this rule that came down. It was communicated that you can't have any handwritten signs anywhere. Like, right? Like, you can't make a sign that's custom made. It all has to be official corporate signage. That was a thing. And it still is a thing. Like, people want to make custom little signs, little notes, whatever, and post them up, stick them up places. And the company doesn't really want to see that. They want it to be standardized, and if there's going to be a sign, it should be a sign that's vetted and approved and ordered through the sign catalog or whatever. In any case, that was direction that we were given. Make sure that people aren't writing handwritten custom signs and putting those up places, because that's against the rules. Okay, that's fine. So a little while later, there's this lady that works in the electronics department, and she goes in the bathroom and there's no toilet paper in the ladies' room stall. So what does she do? She takes her Sharpie marker or pen or whatever she has, and she writes a note on a paper towel and sticks it up on the stall door to say, "No toilet paper." And this note that she had written was there to caution other people, basically, don't use the stall because there's no toilet paper in there. Now I would take objection to this, because the truth is, she could have gone around the corner and found where the toilet paper is and put some more in there. She was an employee of the company. She should have done that. I don't understand. Like, why would you do that, right? But whatever. It wasn't that big of a deal. She put a note on the bathroom stall door that said no toilet paper. Okay, that is not a big deal. Like, now that's fine. You could have went out there and told her, okay, let's not do that. Let's find a roll of toilet paper and put it in there. Let's not be lazy, and let's, do the right thing for your fellow associates and customers and whatever. So that's all fine and dandy, but my peer, this other assistant manager, he was a real rule follower, and he immediately sees he sees the sign when he's walking off the bathrooms or whatever, and he finds out about it, however he found out about it, and then he writes up this employee, and she gets a disciplinary action on her record because she made a handwritten sign, which is against policy. And the reason all this happened is because he's going to follow the rules. Then he goes to the store manager. He says, what should I do about this? Well, the store manager's going to say, well, if somebody violates the policy, then hold them accountable, right? Like, that's the correct thing to say. But the reality was, he was a moron. He was being ridiculous, because why in the world would you write somebody up for some dinky, stupid little thing like that? You just could address it with a simple conversation and move on with your day. But this dude decided to make a mountain out of a molehill. And to me, that was a great example of a person who's willing to follow policy, follow the rules, but they can't use common sense. They don't have good judgment. And if you don't have good judgment, it doesn't matter how well the policy is written, because in the end, you're going to be so busy trying to follow the letter of the law that you're going to completely fail to be true to the spirit of the law, the actual reason why the rule was made in the first place, which is to encourage fairness and consistency. So you got to keep that in mind and just think, well, am I doing the right thing? And I think doing the right thing quite often doesn't align with the official rules, the official guidance. But people don't want to take on the liability of saying, I make a choice. This is what I stand for. This is what I believe. And this is what I think is right. And I'm going to stand by my decision, regardless of what anyone else thinks, because that is what I rationally believe to be the right call. People want something they can fall back on, to be able to say, well, I'm safe because I followed the policy. Real people's lives are more important than a policy. And if you can't be honest with people, they're not going to respect you. And you're not really going to get as far as someone who's able to read between the lines, to generalize just a little bit, to be close, to be in the ballpark, but also not to be super obsessed with always following the letter of the law. You know, I think sometimes we try to reinvent the wheel a little bit. We act like there's always going to be some new thing being invented. Especially in the corporate world, we come up with all this stuff, a new idea, a new way of doing something, and we present it as if it's something revolutionary and groundbreaking. But the reality is it's nothing that anybody hasn't already seen before. Like, I've been around working for Walmart at various levels of the company for quite some time, and I think it's amazing how often somebody will get on a call or join a group or something, and you know what they do when they get asked to come up with a new idea? It always winds up being, let's make a new bulletin board in the hallway to recognize people, or to print out reports and stick them up there so people can read them. You know, at some point you'd think that maybe we would understand that printing off more reports and making another recognition board or metrics board or other thing that has to be maintained and printed off and stuck up there and run by somebody, like, these things don't really make a difference at the end of the day. That's the truth. But there's always going to be somebody new that comes up with it, and they're like, oh, well, this will be a really big benefit to the team, and it's going to revolutionize the way things are. No, it's not. It's not going to revolutionize anything. All it's going to do is add one extra thing that people are going to have to figure out how to find time in the day for. Like, you think you came up with something special and new, but really you just found a new way to present a very old, tired idea. The things that really make a difference are just simple common sense. Doing what you feel to be right. Oftentimes the first thing that comes to mind, whatever seems like it's important, probably is. But we always ignore the obvious things, and then we come up with our complicated, overthought out reasons why things are broken. It's like that relationship you're in, where your spouse says, oh my goodness, like, why is our relationship bad? It's because I'm not pretty enough. Like, no, it's not because you're not pretty enough. It's because I can't trust you. Right? Like, that's the truth. But that's not easy. It's easier to blame a lot of external things than it is to face the basic, honest reality that is glaringly obvious. Like, why are, why do we struggle with retention? Maybe because we overwork people and we don't pay them enough, right? But then somebody's going to come up with any number of other things to explain it away, like, we need to have more special teaching and training events to involve people with, or we need more scheduled touch bases between managers and employees, or some random thing, right? Like, yeah, it's easy to come up with something that's going to make things better on paper, a spreadsheet that you made that's going to look good in a PowerPoint presentation on Monday, while also avoiding the obvious thing that's the elephant in the room. Like, I'll tell you, like with Walmart, I remember when I started off working for Walmart, I was a night stalker. And at that particular time, when we would stock a grocery department, there'd normally be like 2 people in every single aisle stocking the grocery freight. And you'd finish up like 4:30 in the morning with all of the stocking of freight, and then you'd go to break, and then you'd come back and you would be straightening up the aisles and just making sure everything was dialed in, so that when the store opened, more or less, I guess we were 24 hours at that time, but when you'd open, the store would be we call it zoned, but faced and cleaned up and all in order. And it was really easy, actually. Had a great time. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the people I worked with. I enjoyed the management. Like, really, overall, I enjoyed the entire experience. Now, I didn't get paid very well because, you start off minimum wage, basically, working your first job. You're not going to get paid that much. So I didn't get paid that well, but I enjoyed the job. And then as time went on, increasingly there was less and less people. And it was like one person stocking an aisle. And then it's one person stocking 2 aisles. And it's one person stocking 3 aisles. And it's 3 people stocking the entire grocery side of the store. And then at some point, somebody comes along and they say, well, why are the stores sloppy? Like, why is it not, looking good in here? Like, why are people burned out? Well, I don't know. Maybe because there's fewer managers. So now they're working more hours, and there's fewer employees. So all of them feel like they have to do more. And there's less time to train people because everyone is too busy just trying to get the things done that we have to do today. So they don't have time to do any of those extra things that create a sense of camaraderie and culture and happiness and belonging, and et cetera, right? It just goes on, and everyone's all kind of burned out and tired and feeling like they're not valued. And then that's when, after the years pass and things have kind of gotten to the point of no return, then you have these calls where somebody comes along from corporate and they're telling everyone in a conference room, you got to make sure everyone feels like they can bring their full self to work, and you've got to encourage a culture of inclusion and belonging. And that's when, through the lens of experience, it's really hard to take that seriously, because you think to yourself, if you actually believed that, then you would give people autonomy to use their judgment, and you would structure the business in a way that makes people more conducive to feeling like they're part of a team. It's like a full loop PvP game that wonders why there's toxic players in it. Well, it's not really just the players, it's that you made a game where the best and possibly only way to get ahead is by sabotaging other people. So it's not really the players exclusively that are the problem, it's the game design, right? And it's that way in corporations, it's that way in relationships, it's that way in the way we structure our homes. We often cut corners just a little bit here and there. And then eventually we face the consequences of those corners we have cut. We face the consequences of all of the things that we kind of kicked the can down the road on. And then we try to treat the symptoms. And we blame somebody or something for why we're in a broken situation. When the reality is, we created the environment which produced the situation that created the problem that we now have to navigate. And I think the solution always goes back to be genuine, be honest, and don't say things that don't align with your actions. Don't say we value people when you're actually doing things that diminish people's experience. Don't say you care about people when you're actually just trying to control them. Don't say that you want to listen so that you can help when you actually want to listen so that you can get ahead at someone else's expense or get some sort of dirt that you can use against them later on. If you want to do good in the world, do good in your life, do good in your relationships, you have to have good intentions. That's really what it boils down to. And it doesn't matter how much you say the right things. If your actual intent is disingenuous, ultimately, even if people don't know why they feel that way, people will sense that. And things won't work out very well. I think there's a lot of times when you feel like somebody hasn't said anything wrong, they haven't done anything wrong, they haven't really disrespected you, yet you feel disrespected. Things aren't really wrong, but they don't feel right either. And I think a lot of it comes down to the lack of honesty in our lives. When we choose to tell people what we think they should hear instead of just telling them the actual unvarnished truth. Always strive to be honest in all things. Always strive to live your life in the light. Live your life in a way that doesn't really need to conceal itself in any way. Don't be two-faced in any way. Let your yes be a yes, your no be a no. Deal with people directly and in a straightforward way. Follow rules, but don't be completely bound by them. Think for yourself, speak for yourself, and chart a course, not on a basis of what other people have told you to do or what a rule book says, but on a basis of what you truly believe to be right. And if you do those things, chances are You'll have better results in your personal life, better results in business, better results in relationships, all around. No matter how much it might seem like being honest and truthful in the entirety will set you back or expose you to risk, in the end, it tends to pay off more than it costs you. As always, good luck on your adventure. Till next time. Thanks for watching.